What if you've been living inside a dream crafted not by your choices, but by the limits of what you've been allowed to know? What if the stories you've been told were edited to keep you from the truth? In the desert sands beneath lost temples and shattered obelisks, there are secrets older than language itself. Metaphysics is not just a philosophy, it is a map back to the source of reality. In the earliest civilizations, long before the pharaohs rose, there were beings who could speak to the sky, not with words, but with energy. The stones of the Great Pyramid were not laid for tombs, they were conduits. The air inside them still vibrates with sound frequencies not of this world. How could men with no machines lift stones heavier than planes? How could they align the stars with structures using math we rediscovered only in the modern age? These were not accidents. These were remnants of metaphysical mastery. The ancient ones didn't guess, they remembered. They remembered how thought could shape matter, how water could be spoken to, how the body could be healed with sound. You are not being introduced to new knowledge. You are being brought home to what was buried beneath centuries of silence. The Great Pyramid at Giza was once covered in polished white limestone, so reflective that it glowed beneath the sun and moonlight, visible from miles away. The apex was believed to be capped in solid gold, not for ornamentation, but to serve as a receiver and transmitter of cosmic energy. This wasn't mythology, it was metaphysics. Every stone, every angle, every measurement was attuned to planetary and galactic frequencies. The ancients didn't build monuments, they built machines for consciousness. That knowledge has not been lost, it has been hidden, buried under the dogma of progress and the weight of materialism. The ancient priests who designed these structures weren't just architects. They were initiates of a higher understanding, men and women who had transcended the illusion of form and operated through vibration. They saw the physical as the final echo of thought. If you could control the thought, you could command the world. The priests of Heliopolis, the sages of Kemet, the adepts of Mu and Lemuria, they all understood that the universe was mental, that every object you see is condensed spirit, slowed down enough to appear solid. This is not fantasy. This is the unspoken foundation of all that exists in the temples of Karnak. Long forgotten inscriptions speak of the sky people, those who descended in vessels of fire and light. These weren't visitors from other planets in the way we imagine. They were beings of light, stepping down their frequency to become temporarily visible. They didn't use tools to shape stone. They used resonance. Their voices could split mountains. Their eyes could transfer knowledge. The high initiates were trained to meet these beings in the astral planes through long fasts, breath control, sacred chant, and utter stillness. These practices still exist today, passed down in whispers from teacher to student, beyond the reach of empires and universities. In Tibet, it is said a monk can still walk through walls by changing the vibration of his body. In Peru, shamans journey through realms without leaving the cave. In Africa, the Dogon tribe still recalls the Sirius star system in detail without telescopes. These are not anomalies. They are fragments of the original human blueprint, your blueprint. And once you awaken to that, your perception begins to shatter and reform. Look into the eye of Horus, not as a symbol, but as a code. It holds within it mathematical precision, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci spiral, and divisions that map the human brain. The left side of the eye corresponds to intuition, the right to logic, the spiral to consciousness. The ancients weren't creating art, they were transmitting sacred algorithms. Their hieroglyphs were vibrational equations. When you stared at them with focused breath, the glyphs activated centers within the body, unlocking memory and power. These were not primitive drawings, they were advanced metaphysical technologies. You were never meant to worship them, you were meant to remember how to use them. The Ankh, the cross with a loop, was not a religious symbol, it was a diagram of life force moving through the spine, activating the third eye, expanding into eternity. The priests of Osiris did not fear death, they trained to enter it consciously, to navigate the afterlife like a lucid dream, to return if needed. In their rites, death was not an end, but a transition. The soul moved freely, guided by the weight of its own vibration. Light souls rose, heavy ones sank. This was not judgment, it was physics of the soul. Atlanteans spoke in tones, not just language. Their libraries were built of living crystal, pulsing with intent. Thought alone could retrieve knowledge. There were no books, only energy fields. The oracles did not memorize, they harmonized. You've felt glimpses of this when you suddenly know something you never studied. When a dream gives you answers no one could have told you. When intuition leads you to a place you've never been, and it feels like home. These are echoes, traces of your ancient soul self, the one that remembers before time was taught, the one that once stood in the circle of 12 round the sun disk, hands raised, charging light into the grid of the earth. Metaphysics is your soul's native language, and it has waited patiently for you to listen again. In the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, over 12,000 years old, massive pillars stand in deliberate formations. Each is aligned with constellations, forming a celestial map carved in stone. The carvings show animals from eras long before recorded history. The site was buried intentionally, not by nature, but by hands that knew it would one day be needed. Again, the builders were not cavemen, they were star architects. What drove them to hide their work? Perhaps they foresaw the coming darkness, a time when humanity would forget, when it would trade spirit for steel, intuition for logic, unity for division. That time is now, but the reversal has already begun. You are part of it. You are the bridge between then and now, between the hidden and the revealed. That feeling you've had since childhood that you don't fully belong, that something is off. It's not dysfunction, it's remembrance. You were never meant to fit into a broken system. You were born to reawaken a buried one. Even in modern science, we begin to see shadows of the ancient truths. Quantum physics now reveals that particles behave differently when observed, that consciousness affects outcome, that matter can exist in multiple states at once. These findings are not new, they are confirmations of what sages taught millennia ago, that the observer creates, that focus collapses potential into form, that the universe is not out there, it is in here. Every thought you entertain shapes the field around you. Every emotion sends a signal. Gratitude attracts, fear repels, joy amplifies, guilt contracts. These are not moral instructions, they are vibrational mechanics. The law of attraction, once laughed at, is now measured in brain scans and field detectors. But the ancients needed no machines. Their bodies were tuned instruments. Their minds were the laboratories. Their spirits, the experimenters. And their results were miraculous. Consider the miracles recorded in ancient texts, not as divine exceptions, but as metaphysical demonstrations. When a prophet split the sea, it was not weather, it was vibration. When a saint levitated, it was not magic, it was frequency control. When the oracle of Delphi channeled the gods, it was not fantasy, it was field alignment. These stories persist because they resonate. Somewhere within you, they feel possible. That feeling is not fiction, it is your blueprint speaking, your inner temple remembering its rituals. You are not separate from the stories, you are descended from them. Your blood carries symbols. Your DNA is scripture. And the more you tune in, the more you awaken what has always lived in you. Every ancient miracle was preceded by silence, not a passive stillness, but an active surrender. The stillness before creation, the pause before manifestation. The ancients practiced this stillness not to escape life, but to command it. In caves, in pyramids, in high places and low deserts, they closed their eyes and entered the field. There, they saw the web of life not as theory, but as experience. They saw how every thought pulled a thread, how every breath could shift fate, how every prayer bent the field. They didn't wish, they willed. They didn't ask, they became. And this is the essence of metaphysics, not belief, but embodiment, not worship, but realization. You are not meant to chase power, you are meant to awaken to the truth that you already are at. Beneath every sacred mountain, beneath every stone circle, beneath every ancient chant lies a singular truth. You are divine, not metaphorically, literally. You are not dust animated by chance. You are light slowed into form. You are the thought of God dreaming itself into time. The universe did not birth you by accident. It entrusted you with awareness, with choice, with the ability to create. And in that gift lies responsibility. To rise, to remember, to use your consciousness not to destroy, but to harmonize, not to dominate, but to illuminate. The ancients knew this. That's why they spent lifetimes preparing for death, not out of fear, but because they knew life was just one phase in an eternal becoming. The stars above you are not random, they are messages. The constellations are blueprints. Each planet, each orbit, each eclipse is a rhythm in a grand symphony. Astrology was never fortune-telling. It was pattern recognition. It was the language of the soul's journey through form. Your birth was timed. Your name holds code. Your life is not a mistake, it is a story scripted in fire and sky, inked into time, awaiting your awakening. And when you begin to see the signs not just outside, but inside, then you begin to walk not blindly, but deliberately, not as a seeker, but as a now the ancients left more than ruins. They left echoes, whispers in geometry, songs and symbols, maps and myths, and those maps lead back to you. You are the missing piece. You are the return. You are the one they dreamed of, the one they buried knowledge for, because they knew the time would come again, when the soul would hunger for truth, when the heart would cry out for meaning, when the illusions would begin to crack. That time is now. That hunger is yours. That awakening is happening. They told you reality is what you can touch, measure, and see. But what if the fabric of existence is stitched together by forces invisible to the naked eye? What if truth has always lived in the shadows, whispered through ancient winds, etched in forgotten symbols, buried under ruins and dusted scrolls, guarded by silence and erased by time? In the heart of the old world, before science and logic claimed dominion, there were those who walked between two realms, those who knew that the material world was just a reflection of something deeper, something alive, breathing through energy, frequency, and intention. Metaphysics isn't a subject, it's the lost tongue of the universe, the hidden script of all creation, written not in ink, but in vibration. And somewhere, long ago, humanity knew this. They aligned their temples with stars. They built monuments that defy engineering even today. They spoke to forces we now mock and feared what we now forget. These were not primitives. These were conscious beings in tune with the grand pattern. We are the ones who have forgotten. They knew that to speak was to cast a spell, that to think was to shape reality, that emotion was energy in motion, and that the body was just a garment worn by the soul. Their myths were maps, their rituals were codes, their miracles were not fantasy, they were demonstrations of principles we've buried under skepticism. In the ruins of Egypt, in the sacred fires of Zoroastrians, in the Vedas, the Emerald Tablet, and the fragments of the Essenes, lies a blueprint for a life no longer limited by flesh. It is not metaphorical when you hear stories of people walking on water, bending light, or disappearing into air. These are remnants of a time when consciousness was sovereign over matter. They knew how to unlock the inner chamber of the self, to vibrate at the frequency of God, to become one with the will behind the world. But that knowledge was dangerous, not because it harmed others, but because it made you free. And freedom, true metaphysical freedom, dismantles all systems built on control. That's why it was hidden. The ancient ones didn't vanish, they were erased. Their wisdom was broken apart, scattered, and encrypted into religion, art, and symbol. Those who carried the truth were hunted as heretics, burned as witches, silenced as madmen. But truth has a strange way of surviving. It lingers in dreams. It calls to the curious. It shakes the minds of those brave enough to ask, what if there's more? And when you follow that pull, the world begins to crack. Coincidences start to mean something. Time bends. People enter your life like pages from an unwritten book, and your old logic can no longer contain what you're starting to feel. That is the moment the veil begins to lift. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human simulation. That statement, dismissed by many, is the very center of ancient metaphysical thought. The universe is mental, they taught. Mind is the first substance. All matter proceeds from consciousness, not the other way around. In quantum physics, this is echoed. Observation collapses probability into form. What you expect becomes. But while modern science is barely catching up, the ancients lived it. They healed through touch, not because of magic, but because the body is light slowed into form, and intention reorganizes light. They chanted not for culture, but to shift frequencies. They painted mandalas, not for art, but as portals. They did not worship idols. They used them as anchors to align the mind with cosmic principles, the temples of Dendera. The pyramids of Giza, the Oracle of Delphi, the Tower of Babel, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. These were not random constructions. They were machines of consciousness, designed to harness and magnify energy. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb, it is a resonance chamber, its angles aligned with celestial precision, its purpose lost to time, but not to energy. Energy remembers, and in those stones lie echoes of a time when the human mind could move beyond limits. The Atlantans, if you listen beyond myth, were not just a legend. They were metaphysical masters. Their downfall, as told in many versions, was the misuse of power, the arrogance to bend reality without wisdom. Their legacy whispers through Plato, through Babylonian star maps, through Mayan glyphs. These were not isolated cultures. They were fragments of a once unified wisdom shattered by cataclysm and colonized by forgetfulness. When you begin to reclaim that wisdom, the universe responds. You start to notice that you can feel someone's energy before they speak, that your thoughts are not private, they are broadcasted intentions, that your emotions are magnetic signatures, drawing events into form. The law of attraction is only a beginner's step. The ancients knew laws far deeper, the law of correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender not as metaphors, but as living mechanics. To ignore them is to live blindly. To master them is to live divinely. But why has this knowledge been hidden? Because if every human realized they were divine architects of reality, there would be no need for saviors, systems, or fear. And fear is the currency of control. The ancients taught that to know the self is to know the cosmos. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. Your breath echoes the rhythm of the planets. Your heartbeat synchronizes with the Earth's magnetic field. You are not separate from nature, you are nature becoming aware of itself. In the heart of the old world, initiates walked into mystery schools not to memorize facts, but to transform. They fasted, meditated, visualized, and surrendered the ego not for religion, but for revelation. They understood that truth isn't something learned, it is something remembered, hidden in plain sight, encoded in symbols that bypass the intellect and stir the soul. The Eye of Horus is not just Egyptian iconography. It is a map of the human brain, depicting the pineal gland, the seat of spiritual sight. The caduceus, the staff of Hermes, is not a random medical logo. It is the serpent energy rising up the spine, kundalini, awakening divine consciousness. These were not coincidences. These were messages from those who knew. Even the Old Testament, when read without dogma, is a metaphysical document. Moses parting the sea, Elijah ascending in a chariot of fire, Enoch walking with God and disappearing. These are not tales, but metaphors for mastery over the illusion of form. The miracles of prophets are not anomalies, they are reminders. The truth was always that reality bends to the will aligned with divine law. That's why prophets were feared, not because they broke the rules, but because they proved that reality has no rules when you walk with God consciousness. And that consciousness is not reserved for a chosen few. It is your birthright. You are not meant to suffer through randomness. You are meant to awaken. Every desire in your heart is a seed planted by the divine, not to torment you, but to guide you toward your purpose. But you must unlearn the lie that you are powerless. The ancients whispered that belief is the root of experience. Change your belief, and your life rewrites itself. That is why they used symbols, chants, and rituals to implant belief into the subconscious, the true creator behind the curtain. Your subconscious is your altar. What you place upon it manifests. If you keep placing fear, lack, and doubt, do not be surprised when your life reflects it. But if you learn to plant faith, abundance, and truth, you become what the ancients called a living God. That was not arrogance, that was remembrance. In their eyes, God was not a being, but being itself. The all, the infinite, self-aware presence from which all things emerge. And you are a drop of that ocean, containing all its essence. This is the core of metaphysics, not worship, but union. Not escape, but embodiment. You are not here to wait for heaven. You are here to realize it. Right here, right now, within you. The ancient miracles were not from another world. They were from this world seen clearly, and they are returning, not through religion, but through revelation, through those who dare to remember that magic was never fiction, that power was never lost, that truth was only buried in silence. You can feel it stirring. the old world is whispering again. The whispers of forgotten civilizations echo through the layers of time, hidden beneath deserts, mountains, and oceans buried not just under sand and stone, but beneath centuries of disbelief. What if the stories we dismiss as myth are actually encrypted truths? What if metaphysics is the key that unseals the vault of ancient miracles and unspoken realities that the modern mind has neglected? In the cryptic scrolls of lost cities, in the fading hieroglyphs on temple walls, and in the oral traditions passed down through mystics and sages, lies a deeper truth, a truth that defies our physical senses and draws from a source beyond ordinary perception. Civilizations like Atlantis, Lemuria, and ancient Egypt did not just rise on the foundation of agriculture or trade. They were built upon inner knowledge, an understanding of the metaphysical laws that modern science still struggles to grasp. These cultures were fluent in the language of energy, vibration, and frequency. They recognized that thought was not merely a function of the brain, but a force that shapes the structure of reality. The priests and scholars of those eras were not just religious leaders, they were metaphysicians, working with energy grids, crystal harmonics, cosmic alignments, and the unseen architecture of existence. Consider the miracle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Even today, no consensus exists about how it was constructed. Its alignment with celestial bodies, its mathematical perfection, and its energetic properties are not accidents. They are the result of metaphysical science, one that combines geometry, intention, and higher awareness. The ancients believed the earth itself was alive, pulsating with energy lines, later known as ley lines. They built their temples and structures precisely where these energies intersected. They understood that certain locations acted as portals, gateways to dimensions unseen, realms of spirit and consciousness. These were not fairy tales or symbolic fables. They were blueprints, instructions coded in myth and stone, waiting for a consciousness evolved enough to decode them. There are accounts of priests levitating objects using sound frequencies, moving blocks that weighed tons without physical machinery. The Vedic texts speak of Vimanas, flying machines powered by mantras and subtle energies. In Babylon, inscriptions describe eyes that see without seeing, early references to clairvoyance or remote viewing. In Tibet, monks in isolated monasteries speak of the rainbow body, where through deep metaphysical practice, a being dissolves into pure light. These were not illusions, they were demonstrations of a truth so powerful, it was feared, hidden, and eventually forgotten. Metaphysics in ancient times was not merely a subject of study, it was a way of life. One did not simply read about consciousness, one trained it, mastered it, aligned with it. The initiate would spend years in silence, purification, ritual, and practice before being taught a single sacred syllable. Each symbol, chant, or pattern was a portal. The syllables of ancient languages weren't just words, they were vibrations, carriers of frequency that could alter the state of the physical world. This is why so many of the sacred languages, Sanskrit, Aramaic, Hebrew, Egyptian, were guarded, passed down only to the worthy. They held codes, energetic sequences that interacted with the universal field in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. In the temples of Isis, in the mystery schools of Delphi, and in the inner sanctums of the Zoroastrians, knowledge was encoded in rituals, stories, and sacred geometry. The spiral, the triangle, the circle, these were not merely artistic motifs. They were diagrams of the soul's journey, of the structure of reality, and of the forces that shape both. Even the miracle stories that have survived, parting of seas, walking on water, raising the dead, were metaphysical demonstrations. These individuals did not defy nature. They aligned so deeply with it that its higher laws obeyed their will. They had unlocked the code. Jesus, Buddha, Zoroaster, Hermes, they were not just messengers of spiritual wisdom. They were metaphysicians, vibrational engineers who knew the fabric of existence could be moved not by force, but by awareness. In the Quran, Moses strikes the sea with his staff and it splits. But the staff is not a wooden rod. It is symbolic of inner power. In the Bible, the walls of Jericho fall with a shout. In the Vedas, sages create fire with mantra. All are metaphysical truths, not physical impossibilities. These stories are not meant to suspend belief, but to awaken remembrance. The ancients were not less evolved than us. In many ways, they were more advanced in the inner realms. We measure progress by our gadgets and machinery, yet they measured it by intuition, mastery over emotion, connection to the divine, and the ability to shape reality through consciousness. Where we see fiction, they lived function. Where we see magic, they saw law. It is only our disconnection that makes these miracles seem distant. The miracles of the past are not gone, they are simply dormant, waiting in the DNA of consciousness to be reawakened. In ancient Sumer, there are carvings showing figures with wings, tablets in their hands, and bags whose purpose no one fully understands. Some believe these are metaphors. Others say they represent extraterrestrial visitors. But perhaps these beings were simply awakened humans, ones who accessed realms of knowledge now hidden behind the veil of disbelief. There are references in ancient records to cities of light, where beings lived for hundreds of years without aging, nourished by prana or pure energy. In Egypt, it was believed that thought could be weighed after death, proving that the inner world had physical consequence. In China, Taoist masters could shift their energy to avoid death altogether. In Africa, griots told stories of ancestors who could speak to animals, travel through dreams, and see the future. The metaphysical world was not separate from the physical. It was the source code from which everything else emerged. And it still is. We've only forgotten how to look. Our modern world distracts us with noise and speed. But the quiet wisdom of the ancients still pulses beneath the surface. Their stone monuments still vibrate with messages. Their sacred texts still hum with codes. Their rituals, when practiced with sincerity and alignment, still open doors. There were miracles in the ancient world that were never written down. Truths too powerful for even the scribes to record. In the desert caves of Petra, in the underwater ruins off Japan's coast, in the frozen remains of Siberian shamans, knowledge sleeps like a lion in slumber. We carry fragments of it in our dreams, in sudden moments of intuition, in déjà vu, in the pull toward places we've never visited. This is not coincidence. This is soul memory. Metaphysics is the science of remembering. The soul does not age, it gathers. And what it gathers are echoes from lifetimes long past, when truth was felt rather than proven, when energy spoke louder than words, when miracles were natural and fear was rare. You are not separate from those who walked in the temples of Thoth, or chanted in the courts of Solomon. Their blood runs in your veins. Their consciousness knocks at the edge of your thoughts, waiting to be reawakened. When you touch a crystal, when you hear an ancient drumbeat, when you see the stars arranged in perfect silence, something deep within you stirs. That is the metaphysical self, beginning to remember its role in the infinite orchestra of creation. The ancients knew that consciousness was not limited to the brain. It extended into the heart, the field, the quantum web of existence. They were not bound by time and space as we are now. They knew that time folded upon itself, that the future could be seen, that the past could be healed, that even death was just a doorway. Through dreams, trances, and rituals, they walked in and out of worlds, retrieved knowledge, healed others, and shaped destiny. They recorded these things not to entertain, but to preserve. But many of their scrolls were burned, their libraries destroyed, their knowledge suppressed. What survives now are symbols, puzzles, riddles scattered across the globe like pieces of a cosmic map. The Eye of Horus, the Flower of Life, the Tree of Sephiroth, the I Ching. These are not disconnected ideas, they are coordinates, metaphysical, indicators of a hidden architecture that still pulses beneath everything we see. When you meditate with intention, when you chant a sacred syllable, when you enter silence, you are not practicing a modern spiritual fad. You are stepping into the lineage of metaphysicians who bent time, space, and matter with their focus. You are reconnecting to the root of all things. This is what the ancients wanted us to remember. That the universe responds not to effort, but to alignment, not to fear, but to frequency, not to logic, but to love. The invisible shapes the visible, the subtle births the solid. The miracle is not the event, it is the shift in perception that allows you to see what was always there. Ancient metaphysics was never about escaping reality. It was about entering it more deeply, stripping away the illusions, and touching the living energy that animates all forms. It was about communion with the divine, not as a distant God, but as a force within you. This is the truth that temples guarded, that secrets protected, that mystics whispered. And this is the truth that is returning now, not in stories, but in your own direct experience, when you dare to look beyond the surface of things and remember who you truly are. Of all the mysteries that have haunted the human spirit since the dawn of civilization, perhaps none have been as persistent and elusive as the question of hidden dimensions. Ancient texts, whispered myths, and forbidden scrolls have long hinted at realities behind the veil, spaces not bound by the three dimensions we perceive with our senses. These ancient accounts, often dismissed as folklore or superstition, now re-emerge with startling consistency as metaphysics pierces the thin membrane between what is seen and what is deeply, frighteningly real. In the time of the ancients, when the stars were gods and the earth was still spoken to in sacred rites, there existed those who claimed to walk between dimensions. In Sumerian temples, under the shadow of ziggurats, priests practiced chants that vibrated at frequencies unknown to modern science. In Egypt, sacred chambers beneath the pyramids were said to house gateways, portals not of stone or steel, but of vibration and thought. And in the Indus Valley, buried beneath centuries of silence, clay seals etched with untranslatable scripts whisper stories of travel beyond the stars, not with machines, but with the soul. These aren't just cultural myths. They're fragments of a forgotten science, a metaphysical technology that used the mind, not metal, to traverse existence. They speak of a dimension where time folds into itself, where thought instantly becomes form, where the separation between observer and reality collapses. And the strange part is, today's quantum physics echoes the same truth in complex equations. When physicists discovered quantum entanglement, when particles across galaxies influence each other instantly, they unknowingly validated what the mystics of Atlantis once taught, that all is one and distance is illusion. Atlantis, the mythical continent described by Plato, was more than a parable. According to Hermetic scrolls and preserved oral traditions of African shamans, Atlantis thrived on metaphysical power. Its crystalline cities pulsed with energy drawn directly from the Earth's core, and the celestial harmonics of the stars. They used sound to levitate stone, light to heal, and intention to shape weather. Their downfall, some say, was not war or natural disaster, but a corruption of metaphysical balance, a misuse of the same power that elevated them. And then there's Babylon, the cradle of civilization, where the tower was never merely a structure of pride, but a metaphysical ladder, a replica of the axis mundi, the cosmic axis, allowing the soul to rise through layers of reality. There, gods weren't merely deities, but beings from other dimensions, clothed in symbols the human mind could comprehend. In truth, these were dimensional entities, some benevolent, others cunning, feeding off human consciousness, guiding the fate of empires and vanishing into obscurity once their purposes were served. The mystery deepens when we look at the Nag Hammadi scriptures, hidden away in jars in Egyptian deserts for thousands of years. These texts tell of eons, spiritual forces beyond space and time that interact with our world, weaving and unweaving reality itself. The Gnostics, who were hunted and silenced for these beliefs, declared that the visible world was a simulation created by an ignorant demiurge, and that only through inner metaphysical awakening could one escape the illusion. Strangely, this concept echoes the holographic theory of modern cosmology, which proposes that our universe may be a projection from a higher dimensional source. In the ancient world, miracles weren't anomalies, they were demonstrations of metaphysical understanding. When a man walked on water, it wasn't magic, it was mastery of density and vibration. When prophets split seas, they didn't break nature, they worked in harmony with deeper laws that govern matter beneath its surface, the same laws that allow light to bend around black holes. But such knowledge was dangerous. Power that could heal could also destroy, and so it was hidden, encoded in symbols, buried in pyramids, carved into temples. Secret societies emerged not to dominate the world, but to protect truths from those who would exploit them. The Rosicrucians, the Essenes, the Magi each guarded fragments of metaphysical science handed down from civilizations wiped out by flood, fire, or greed. Across these epochs, there existed one unifying belief, that man is not a being limited to flesh and bone, but a multi-dimensional consciousness temporarily experiencing density. This truth was not just spiritual, it was scientific. Thought, emotion, belief, these were not intangibles. They were forces, vibrations, capable of altering the structure of reality. Modern science is slowly catching up. Somatics demonstrates how sound can shape matter. Studies show human DNA responds to language and frequency. Plants grow faster to music. Water retains memory. These are not coincidences. They are glimpses of the ancient metaphysical matrix, but perhaps the most chilling revelation lies in what the ancients feared the most, not the gods, not the elements, but the loss of memory, the forgetting of who we are. In every tradition, there's a warning that if humanity falls too deeply into matter, if it loses touch with the invisible realms, it will become blind to its own divinity, enslaved not by chains, but by false perception. And that's where we stand now, in a world of noise, disconnected from silence, in a world of concrete, cut off from spirit. But the past is not lost. Its echoes remain in dreams, in intuition, in the pull of the stars on a quiet night. The truth is still there, not in libraries, but in vibration, not in technology, but in consciousness. And when the seeker dares to look inward, when the veil of distraction is lifted, the ancient codes begin to unlock. The same codes that raised stones into pyramids, summoned rain from clear skies, and allowed souls to walk between worlds. It begins in the silence, in the stillness, in the resonance of a thought aligned with truth. The journey is not outward, but inward, downward into the depths of the self, where the soul is not a spark but a portal, a doorway through which the ancient wonders are not just remembered, but reborn. The same force that moved prophets, mystics, and sages still pulses through every heartbeat, waiting to be awakened by belief, by intention, by stillness. Metaphysics is not the study of fantasy. It is the rediscovery of a science long forbidden, long buried, and long feared. The ancients did not guess, they knew. They aligned with energies the modern world dismisses as impossible. They moved between worlds because they understood the laws beneath the laws. They saw the fabric of reality as a mutable script, not a fixed stage. And those scripts remain encoded in temples, myths, numbers, sound, geometry, and most of all, in you. For the great secret is this: you are the final dimension. You are the hidden temple. You are the miracle the ancients once performed and the mystery they died to protect. What you think becomes. What you feel calls. What you believe creates. And the more you remember, the more the unseen begins to respond, not as a distant echo, but as a living presence, a force ancient and eternal, waking within you again. You were never meant to live in a world of only 5 senses. Your soul was born for something far beyond touch, taste, sound, sight, and smell. You carry within you the residues of an ancient energy, the traces of a world where mountains moved, not with machines but with the command of faith, where oceans parted not by science, but by the submission of water to the will of one who speaks without a tongue. Long before the modern world claimed monopoly over truth, there were civilizations that whispered to the stars and received answers not in theory, but in revelation. In temples hidden beneath the sands of forgotten lands, there are scrolls not made of paper but of crystal, holding codes of vibration that modern instruments cannot read. There were no universities, but there was wisdom. There were no satellites, yet they navigated through the stars. Metaphysics is not new. It is not modern. It is as old as breath, as ancient as the first sound that echoed across the void before time existed. That sound was not a bang. It was an intention. It was the word. And in that word was power. The power to call forth matter from nothing. The power to summon light without fire. The power to create form from thought. Those who dismiss the old miracles as myths are only blinded by the arrogance of progress. The pyramids were not built with brute strength. The stones, some weighing more than 100 tons, were lifted with knowledge of frequency, levitation, and resonance. The ancient priests knew how to manipulate matter using sound. In one of the oldest Egyptian temples, the Dendera light, carved in stone, shows a bulb-like object connected to a coil. It is not fiction, it is forgotten memory. The ancient Vedas speak of Vimana, flying crafts that soared across the skies long before the Wright brothers were born. These weren't dreams, these were documents of experience. But we bury what we can't understand. We call it mythology, dismiss it with a wave, and replace it with textbooks that give us partial truths. What if the stories of staffs turning into snakes, seas splitting, and people walking on water were not fairy tales, but the revelations of higher laws that defy Newtonian physics? What if those who performed these signs were not magicians, but those who mastered the laws of metaphysical alignment? They were not breaking reality. They were working with a deeper layer of it. Reality is not rigid. It bends to belief. It flows with frequency. When a human reaches a level of inner clarity, when intention aligns with the divine will, the veil between the possible and impossible shreds like silk. And in that moment, fire cannot burn, gravity cannot hold, and water becomes as solid as stone. The problem is not with the miracles. The problem is with the mind that doubts. We are taught to believe only in what can be replicated, measured, repeated. But what if the divine doesn't submit to your lab coat? What if it requires not your intellect, but your surrender? In the ancient world, knowledge was transmitted not through lectures, but through initiation. The mystics would place their palms on your forehead and transfer not words, but vibration, not sentences, but energy. You wouldn't learn a truth, you would become it. In the temples of Luxor, initiates would spend 40 days in complete darkness, fasting, meditating, until the pineal gland, the inner eye, would begin to open. And when it did, they saw not hallucinations, but the very fabric of reality. They saw sacred geometry, the divine code, the golden ratio pulsing through all things. We laugh at alchemy today, imagining foolish men trying to turn lead into gold. But the real alchemists were not obsessed with metal. They were obsessed with transmutation of the soul. Lead was just a symbol for the base human. Gold was the awakened one. The transformation they sought was not external, but internal. They understood what we have forgotten. Everything physical is a shadow of the spiritual. What appears hard is soft in its essence. What looks still is vibrating rapidly beneath your sight. The real work of metaphysics is to reverse your gaze, not to look out, but to look within. When you go within, you find that ancient miracles are still alive. They're just waiting for someone to believe again. A man once healed the blind with his hands, not because of the hands, but because of the belief behind them. That man walked with such certainty of his connection to the source that even death obeyed him. He raised a body from the grave not by force, but by frequency. The vibration of his being was so pure, so aligned, that the atoms of decay reassembled into life. This is not magic, this is mastery. And mastery is available to anyone who dares to unlearn. In ancient Persia, the mystic kings would sit in stillness under the moon for hours, until the heavens began to respond. In the depths of their silence, they received visions of realms layered behind this one, realms not made of matter, but of thought, of meaning, of raw intention. These realms are not fantasy. They're more real than the chair you're sitting on. You just don't have the eyes to see them. The sophists danced to dissolve the ego, to break the prison of thought. As they whirled, they were not performing. They were becoming the spiral of creation itself. In those moments, time stopped. Body dissolved. Only essence remained. If you want to understand metaphysics, you must first destroy your addiction to logic. Logic is the tool of the mind. But truth, real truth, doesn't live there. It lives in the heart. The ancients knew this. That's why their symbols, like the Eye of Horus, were not just art, they were codes. The Eye of Horus is a diagram of the pineal gland, the inner vision, the spiritual antenna. Why would a civilization thousands of years ago have such knowledge of inner anatomy? If they were primitive, they weren't. They were masters. We are the primitive ones, dressed in suits, staring at screens, blind to our own potential. Miracles still happen, but not in the cities, not where the noise of ego drowns out the whisper of the soul. They happen in the deserts, in the caves, in the hearts of those who have emptied themselves. In a remote Himalayan monastery, monks have been seen levitating, eyes closed, unmoved by cold or wind. In the African bush, Shamans call rain with a chant that aligns the clouds with the pulse of the earth. These are not tricks, they are truths, but we ignore them because they don't come with citations. The greatest lie of the modern world is that the ancient world was ignorant. It wasn't. It was just speaking a different language, a language of vibration, intuition, presence, and surrender. If you think the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria are fantasies, consider this: almost every ancient culture, from the Mayans to the Babylonians, speaks of a great civilization that fell due to pride and misuse of power. They weren't copying each other, they were remembering. Memory, collective memory, is embedded in our DNA. That's why you sometimes feel things you've never learned. That's why a certain sound, a certain place, a certain silence can bring you to tears. You are not just your name, your passport, your job. You are a walking archive of universal truth, wrapped in skin. Metaphysics is not a study, it is a remembering. You are not learning something new, you are reclaiming something ancient. The ancients lived by laws that today sound like fantasy, but they were just tuned into frequencies we have forgotten. They lived in harmony with the earth, not above it. They understood that thought creates reality, and that belief carves possibility into form. That is why a single prayer from a pure heart could bring rain to a desert. That is why a single word, uttered in alignment with divine will, could destroy an empire or build one. We must return to this knowing, not by abandoning science, but by transcending its limits. Science is not the enemy of spirituality. It is simply the toddler, sibling, curious, brilliant, but still learning to walk. The real power lies in integration. When you blend the analytical with the intuitive, when you allow the mind to serve the soul, you unlock the gates that ancient mystics guarded not with weapons, but with wisdom. These gates are within you. The keys are your intention, your stillness, your surrender. The miracles haven't vanished. We just stopped believing we were worthy of them. The ancient world is not dead. It is waiting, watching, whispering through symbols, through dreams, through strange synchronicities that you brush off as coincidence. But nothing is coincidence. Everything is a message. Everything is a mirror. Everything is a manifestation of something deeper, unseen, and eternally present. To touch it, you must close your eyes to the world and open them to the soul. The wind carried secrets no one heard, and the mountains held whispers older than humanity. In the crevices of time, where modern science failed to see and logic dared not go, something ancient still breathed, veiled behind centuries of ignorance. Long before the written word, before fire was harnessed or stone carved into idols, the earth was a silent witness to forces no one could name, but all could feel. They moved through air like invisible rivers, threading the living and the dead in one timeless tapestry. This was the realm of the unseen, where metaphysics was not philosophy, it was survival. A code for existing within an order too subtle for the five senses. Elders from lost civilizations, buried beneath sand and swallowed by vines, once tapped into these energies not with books, but with silence, alignment, and an unshakable knowing. They carved symbols not to decorate, but to transmit frequency, embedding thought into stone, time-proofing wisdom that would one day reawaken when humanity looked inward once again. In Babylon, the priest-kings studied the stars not merely to chart the seasons, but to decode the architecture of divine intention. They believed each planet was a guardian of a metaphysical gate, each eclipse a message, not an omen. What they observed was not just astronomy, it was a mirror reflecting the human soul. To them, the outer world was the body of the inner truth. In a forgotten temple, illuminated by fire and shadow, they meditated for days without food, learning how to exit the body at will, how to travel beyond the veil of the physical and return with knowledge that no language could express. These ancient metaphysicians didn't guess, they knew, and what they knew terrified kings and empires, that a single soul, when aligned fully with the divine principle of the universe, could alter the direction of a kingdom with thought alone, that the power to reshape reality was not in armies or wealth, but in consciousness. And so they hid, encoded, whispered, and passed on the sacred mechanics only to those who had endured suffering enough to be trusted. There is a reason mystery schools required silence for years. The silence was not punishment, it was preparation. To perceive metaphysical truths, one had to strip away ego, expectation, and noise. You had to die to the world of man-made meaning. In Egypt, the adepts stood still for hours beneath the stars, aligning their breath with the vibration of Sirius, believing it held the memory of humanity's origin. Their temples, perfectly aligned with constellations, were not just aesthetic marvels, they were energetic devices, portals built to pull higher realms closer to the earth. When you entered the Temple of Hathor, and the sound resonated in your chest, it was because the architecture was designed not for acoustics, but for awakening dormant frequencies in your DNA. The priestesses would chant in tones now forgotten, tones that caused visions, not hallucinations, but actual openings in consciousness through which divine knowledge poured like molten gold. It was metaphysics as engineering, and the human body was the vessel it animated. In Vedic India, sages sat beside rivers that shimmered not from sunlight, but from proximity to other dimensions. The rishis, wrapped in silence and smoke, spoke of Brahman, the boundless, infinite essence behind all form. They taught that the world is not real in the way we perceive it, that it is Maya, illusion, a projection from a deeper substrate of consciousness. And this wasn't metaphor to them, it was physics only. Their language was poetic. Because human language fails at such thresholds, they claim that you are not the observer of reality, but its source, and that time is not a straight line, but a spiral of experiences looping through parallel lives. They claimed memory is not stored in the brain, but in the soul, and that death is simply the shedding of a costume you wore for a play you wrote before you were born. It is said that the rishis could levitate, not through magic, but through absolute stillness, when the mind becomes so pure that it ceases resistance, and gravity no longer recognizes the body as anchored. They understood that mind and matter are not separate, but that matter is the echo of thought, dense and delayed. In every forgotten era, from Atlantis to Lemuria, from the Andes to the Himalayas, there existed humans who touched the divine pattern of the universe, not through doctrine, but through vibration. Their teachings shared uncanny similarities, that everything is frequency, that intention shapes reality, and that we are all fragments of the same living intelligence, shattered into temporary forms to explore the infinite from every angle. The ancient ones didn't build pyramids for tombs. They built them as tuning forks, as receivers, aligned perfectly with magnetic lines of the earth, pulling celestial energy downward and redirecting it into the collective grid. And when these civilizations fell, it wasn't because they lacked technology, but because they misused it. For when metaphysical knowledge is used without love, it collapses in on itself. Just as a body becomes diseased when the soul is ignored, so do societies implode when they forget the sacred balance between the seen and unseen. Even the ancient Chinese alchemists, long before modern chemistry, understood that the body held not only organs, but gateways called meridians that map the flow of life force, qi, throughout the system. These weren't spiritual metaphors. They were energetic highways, tested and traced by generations of seekers who realized that disease was not the beginning, but the endpoint of energetic disharmony. The Yellow Emperor's classic of medicine outlines how emotion, thought, and spirit all contribute to the manifestation of illness. To heal, one must align the internal vibrations with the Tao, the natural rhythm of the universe. And Tao cannot be described, only lived. When Tao flows through you, you are invisible to misfortune. But when you fight it, you break, because resistance creates friction, and friction burns away essence. This is the metaphysics of surrender, that power lies in allowing, and control is an illusion. The shamans of the Americas dance not for entertainment, but to alter the frequency of their reality. They consumed sacred plants not to escape, but to see. They described other worlds layered over this one like transparent veils, each with its own beings, laws, and messages. And while modern eyes may call them primitive, they knew things science still stumbles toward, that the earth itself is a conscious being, that thoughts are alive, that animals speak in frequencies we have forgotten how to hear, and that each person is born with a soul contract, a mission, coded in light, chosen before incarnation. The shaman's job was to help retrieve the parts of the soul that had been lost through trauma, fear, or disconnection, because in metaphysical Terms healing is not fixing, it is remembering. You are already whole. You have simply forgotten the path back to your original light. All of this knowledge was once common among initiates. It was not hidden out of arrogance, but to protect those who were not yet ready. Because metaphysical truths, when wielded by an unprepared mind, cause distortion. Just as a child cannot be trusted with fire, so too must the uninitiated be shielded from the knowledge that thought creates reality. For if one believes this without maturity, they will seek to control others, to manipulate outcomes, to bend reality through force rather than alignment. This leads not to creation, but to collapse. The ancients knew this. They taught that humility is the first doorway, that without heart, no amount of power can be sustained, that only when love becomes the center of the seeker's life can the deeper mysteries safely unfold. There are fragments of this knowledge scattered across every culture, every religion, every sacred text. In the Quran, it is written that Allah says be, and it is. This is metaphysical law, that divine intention precedes material form. In the Bible, it is said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. In the Tao Te Ching, the way that can be named is not the eternal way. All of these point to the same silent reality that behind this dream of solid things, there exists an unchanging, ever-present field of awareness, and that you are not separate from it. You are it, dreaming yourself as human for a while, but always holding the seed of infinity inside. And when you begin to awaken, you don't need new beliefs, you need silence, presence, and the courage to unlearn everything that was placed in your mind by a world asleep. The true journey of metaphysics does not begin in books or classrooms. It begins the moment you ask a question no one can answer, the moment you feel a pull towards something that can't be seen, touched, or named. It begins in the ache behind your ribcage, in the silence between breaths, in the strange familiarity you feel when looking at the stars. It begins when you realize that what you were told reality is cannot possibly be all there is. And in that moment, the universe leans in, watching, waiting, hoping that one more soul has remembered the song it sang before birth. Because when you remember, the illusions fall away, and what's left is not emptiness, but everything. Not darkness, but light so pure it blinds you until you are no longer separate from it. You become what you seek. You return to what you never left. The deeper you go into the invisible, the more real everything begins to feel. What once seemed like air becomes a current. What once appeared empty begins to whisper. And what once felt distant now moves within your very breath. This is not imagination, this is the hidden mechanism of metaphysics, where the outer world bends quietly to the shape of your inner design. The ancients who walked barefoot on stone floors and read the sky like scripture knew this well. Their rituals were not primitive superstition, but keys to unlock the architecture of the unseen. They did not bow to the elements in fear, but in dialogue. Fire was not a symbol, it was a listener. Wind was not air, it was an echo. They etched their codes into stone because they knew that truth lives longer when spoken without language. These were not myths, they were instructions. The so-called miracles of the ancient world were not accidents, but demonstrations of laws. We no longer remember how to obey. Imagine a priest in the temple of Thoth, whispering into a bowl of water, watching its surface ripple not from touch but from thought. Or a seer in Mesopotamia moving the stars of fate with chants that carried the pulse of galaxies in their vibration. In Alexandria, scrolls burned that contained the formulas for vibrational transmutation, for bending matter through intention alone, for accessing frequencies that could pull healing from the air. We buried those truths under centuries of concrete certainty and called them legends, never realizing that the veil between us and what we call impossible is made not of iron, but of belief. The boundaries of reality are not rigid walls, they're drawn in the sand by the limits of your perception. Change what you believe, and the borders of the world change with Yaubit to truly see. You must first unsee. You must strip yourself of the lens that modernity has glued to your consciousness. You must peel back the belief that only what is measurable is real. The heart beats before the brain develops in the womb, and yet we say the mind rules over all. The ancients knew better. They placed the seat of the soul in the heart, not the head. And every sacred ceremony started by stilling the breath, not to calm the body, but to align the spirit with the frequency of the divine. This was not just spiritual poetry. This was physics before physics had a name. In ancient temples, every architectural detail was tuned to sound. Stones were carved to sing. Walls held resonance, like the inside of a drum. When initiates spoke sacred words, the structure amplified them until the very air began to hum with intention. In those chambers, sound was not heard, it was experienced. The priests and priestesses of those days were not religious in the modern sense. They were vibrational engineers, consciousness alchemists, artisans of the invisible. They understood that everything in the material world is merely an echo of the immaterial. That before there was form, there was frequency, and before there was frequency, there was stillness, and that stillness is not emptiness, it is potential, waiting to be shaped by thought. The Book of Enoch speaks of watchers who descended not to corrupt humanity, but to teach them how to harness the secrets of the stars. These beings were not figments. They were echoes of intelligences older than Earth, visiting civilizations whose names are lost beneath oceans. The Lemurians knew how to activate light within matter. The Atlantans didn't vanish, they withdrew, folding their wisdom into symbols that would later appear in every culture like seeds of memory, waiting to bloom again. And bloom they do, every time someone dares to go beyond the veil of the seen and ask not what is, but what lies behind. A stone in your hand may seem solid, but magnify it deeply enough and you'll find emptiness vibrating in pattern. The difference between a diamond and coal is not substance, it is arrangement. This is the core principle of metaphysical transmutation. Shift the vibration, and you shift the form, not metaphorically, literally, but to wield that kind of influence. You must first master your own vibration. You cannot shape reality if you're shaped by reaction. The ancients fasted not to suffer, but to sharpen. They chanted not to impress, but to tune. They meditated not to escape, but to enter more deeply into the realm behind the world. Laugh at magic, because we don't understand the mechanics. But what is a smartphone if not a crystal that transmits invisible signals through frequencies we can't see? What is Wi-Fi if not an unseen force that connects minds across distances instantly? The difference between science and magic is simply time, what we call spiritual energy. The ancients called breath of the gods. In Egyptian, the word Ka meant the vital force that lives beyond death. It's the same thing we now call consciousness. The soul is not a poetic idea, it's a geometric field, a pattern of information, a living record of intention encoded in light. And every intention you hold etches itself into that field like grooves in vinyl, playing back into your life as events, encounters, and emotions that feel random until you realize you composed them. Yourself. There were once schools, true mystery, schools where this knowledge was taught not in books, but through initiation. A student would spend years cleansing the body of all toxins, silencing the mind of all noise, and emptying the heart of all selfish desire. Only then, when the vessel was clear, would the higher currents begin to flow through them. And what they learned in those chambers was not told, it was shown through direct experience, through altered states, through immersion in sacred sound and sacred geometry. They were shown the true structure of the universe, a universe not ruled by randomness, but by law. Law not in the sense of control, but in the sense of symmetry, harmony, cause and consequence. These teachings are not gone. They are buried in myth, encoded in symbols, sleeping in forgotten manuscripts, and etched into the layout of sacred sites across the globe. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb, it's a frequency chamber. The temples of Angkor Wat are not ruins, they're star maps. The ziggurats of Babylon were not only altars, they were energetic generators. These sites were designed to interface with celestial alignments, drawing down cosmic patterns and grounding them into Earth's grid. The priests knew when to open the gates. They knew which sounds would wake the stones, which days the sky would speak, which symbols would trigger the flow of divine memory. Everything modern science is beginning to touch: quantum entanglement, morphogenetic fields. Non-local consciousness was already known to the sages of the old world. But they didn't just study it, they lived it, they shaped it. They passed through the membrane between thought and form with the ease of breath. And they warned us, they left messages, carved eyes above temple doors, serpents guarding trees, flood myths that speak of cycles of forgetting. They knew we would fall asleep, and they left trails for us to find when we woke. You are waking now. This awakening is not about acquiring power, but about reclaiming truth. Real power isn't domination, it's alignment. When you are in alignment with the deeper structure of the universe, you do not need to force reality. To change it flows in harmony with your essence. But to get there, you must first unlearn everything you've been taught to believe about what's possible. You must question the closed box you were placed in since birth, the one labeled reality, and push your hands through its walls. You must allow yourself to feel the pull of the unknown, not as fear, but as a calling, because it is a calling. There are those who still hold the line keepers of the old codes, scattered across continents, disguised in ordinary faces. They may be healers, artists, monks, wanderers. They may speak in riddles or remain in silence, but they carry the resonance. You'll feel it when you meet them, a strange familiarity, as if they've walked in your dreams before. And perhaps they have, for time is not linear in the metaphysical realm. Past and future are notes in a chord being played in every moment. The miracle is not that you can change your future. The miracle is that you can remember it, because everything you seek to become is already waiting for you in a higher version of now. The you who already knows, already sees, already flows with the current that turns galaxies. Your job is not to chase it. Your job is to align with it. And that alignment begins with silence. The silence that lets the deeper frequency rise. The silence that lets the mind surrender. The silence that reveals the voice behind thought. This silence is not empty. It is not lonely. It is not weak. It is the place from which all sound is born. And when you touch it, truly touch it, you will understand why the ancient mystics spoke less and radiated more. Why their words shook kingdoms. Why their presence healed diseases. Why their gaze could awaken remembrance in the deepest part of another soul, because they had become conduits of the source itself, and that source is not in some faraway heaven or some mythical paradise. It is here, now, breathing you, living through your hands, your heartbeat, your longing. It has never left. It has only waited for you to remember, and you are remembering every question, every wonder, every strange dream and aching whisper. Pulling you towards something more is the proof that you're already on the path. Not a path outside you, but the path within. And that path leads back to the beginning. Not the beginning of time, but the beginning of knowing. Before words, before matter, before division, before forgetting. That beginning is not behind you. It is still pulsing right now. There comes a time in every seeker's journey when silence becomes louder than words. When the questions that once echoed with desperation begin to dissolve, not because they were answered, but because they are no longer needed. The mind that once demanded proof begins to bow in awe to the unknown. The heart, once fractured by doubt, becomes a vessel of knowing. The soul, once veiled by the weight of the material, rises and begins to remember itself. This is not an ending, but a return to a truth older than civilization, deeper than any scripture, and more alive than anything the eyes can see. Metaphysics was never just a study of what lies beyond. It is the path that leads within, and ultimately, the path that reveals everything. The ancient world knew what the modern world forgot. The priests of Thoth, the mystics of the Indus, the oracles of Delphi, the hidden scrolls of the Essenes each held fragments of a whole we've only begun to rediscover. Their temples were not just places of worship. They were living laboratories of consciousness, vibration, and divine geometry. These weren't mythologies. They were blueprints encoded in symbols, frequencies, and sacred rituals. They understood what many today still resist, that the universe does not run on matter, but on meaning, that what appears solid is merely slowed down energy, and what we call magic is simply knowledge misunderstood. What they touched wasn't supernatural, it was supremely natural. Just hidden behind layers of perception not yet refined. One of the greatest miracles recorded in ancient texts, and largely dismissed by modern science, is the manipulation of matter through pure thought. There are glyphs carved into temple walls showing high priests levitating stones, aligning them with such precision that even today's engineers marvel. In the texts of Hermes Trismegistus, there are references to the word that moves the wind, the utterance of a frequency so pure it shifts the elements. The pyramids of Giza were not tombs, they were resonance chambers. Their shape, alignment, and internal structure are metaphysical technologies, machines of consciousness, designed to amplify the soul's frequency. They are still functioning, but only for those who can attune to them. You cannot understand them through sight alone. You must feel their vibration in your own being. And there is more, much more. The miracles of ancient prophets were not isolated phenomena. They were demonstrations of metaphysical law in action. The parting of seas, the speaking of divine tongues, the walking upon water, these are not fantasies for the faithful. They are glimpses into the potential of human consciousness unbound by ego and time. There is a hidden history of the world that doesn't sit in museums or schools. It lives in symbols, in dreams, in ruins covered by sand. And most of all, it lives in you. You are the ark. You are the temple. You are the forgotten miracle. Everything is vibration. Every thought you think ripples through the ether, shaping realities long before they appear. The body is just a suit of frequency, and disease is a distortion of your natural harmony. That's why ancient healers sang over the sick. They weren't just comforting, they were realigning. Today, science calls it quantum entanglement, string theory, morphic resonance. But long before these terms, there were songs, there were rituals, there were spoken words wrapped in intention and belief so powerful that they rearranged the atoms of the world, and still can. If you believe that miracles died with the ancients, you've missed the entire point. The miracles never stopped. Humanity did. Why is this knowledge hidden? Because power without consciousness is dangerous. Because when a human being realizes they can manifest realities, speak to the divine, and heal through thought, they become ungovernable. The ancients protected this wisdom not because it was false, but because it was holy. Only those who humbled themselves to truth, not greed, could be trusted with it. That is the true meaning of initiation. It is not about memorizing texts, joining secret orders, or chanting in cloaks. It is about letting go of the illusion of separation, about dissolving the boundaries between you and Source, about surrendering the ego to the eternal. Once you do that, metaphysics is no longer a study. It becomes your way of life. We live in a time of forgetting, but forgetting is the first step to remembering. The spiritual drought of the modern world is not a curse, it's a calling. People are no longer satisfied with systems that separate them from meaning. They are thirsty for truth, even if they don't know what it looks like. That's why this book is not just information, it is initiation. Not into a group, but into a deeper you. The one who already knows, already remembers, already vibrates with the song of the stars. And if you quiet the world long enough, you will hear it again. You are not your name, your story, or your skin. You are frequency. You are light. You are thought before form. That's why the universe responds not to your words, but to your vibration. You attract not what you want, but what you are. And when you become what you seek, it can no longer hide. There's a final truth, one that has been guarded for centuries, buried beneath allegory, myth, and coded texts. That truth is this: reality is a mirror, and the divine is not outside of you, it is you, experiencing itself through your eyes. The gods of old were not outside entities, they were personifications of your own potential. Zeus is your will, Isis is your intuition, Horus is your higher vision. The war of the gods is the war within, the battle between the limited self and the limitless soul. And when you awaken, the war ends. There is no savior coming, because you were never lost. You were simply asleep, dreaming of separation, craving a home you never truly left. The ancients knew that life is a school, not a punishment, that each soul chooses its path, its challenges, even its pain, as a way to remember its own power. They carved this wisdom into stone so it would not be lost to fire, flood, or forgetting. And now, it returns, not through temples or papyrus, but through your own awakening, through your longing, through your silence, through your willingness to go deeper than the noise of the world and listen to the stillness, where truth lives. And when you do, the veil will lift, not all at once, but layer by layer, as you reclaim what was never gone, only hidden. This is not the end of a book. It is the beginning of a new world, born not outside of you, but within. A world where your thoughts create, your beliefs build, and your soul leads. A world where miracles are natural, time is an illusion, and death is merely transformation. A world where you no longer fear the unknown, because you are the unknown. You are the mystery. You are the miracle. The ancient power still lives. The metaphysical truth still breathes. And it is waiting for you to remember, awaken, and become it again. Because you are not separate from the universe. You are the universe, remembering itself.